The dash cam footage would eventually become the most watched video in the state's history. But on that humid afternoon, Officer Vance Hargrove didn't know the world was watching. He only saw a black man in a tactical vest standing on a property where Hargrove decided he didn't belong. He saw a suspect. He didn't see the classified clearance level, the 3 distinct scars from shrapnel in Kandahar, or the phone number in that man's pocket that went straight to the Pentagon. Hargrove reached for his taser, thinking he was about to teach a lesson. He had no idea he was the one about to be schooled. This is the story of how a corrupt department picked a fight with the wrong ghost. The engine of the classic Dodge Charger rumbled like a beast waking from a long slumber. Desmond "Des" Kane wiped grease from his knuckles with a rag that had seen better days, his eyes scanning the impeccable chrome bumper. Des moved with deliberate, conserved energy. He didn't twitch, and he didn't rush. Every motion was calculated, a lingering habit from his time in special operations, specifically a unit that didn't officially exist on paper until some time ago. He was currently parked in the driveway of 422 Maple Ridge, a sprawling mid-century modern estate in Oak Haven, a suburb that prided itself on manicured lawns, high property taxes, and a neighborhood watch that functioned more like a private surveillance network. Des had closed on the house recently. He hadn't moved the furniture in yet, just his tools and the charger he was restoring. He liked the quiet. He needed the quiet. Across the street, behind sheer lace curtains that smelled of lavender and judgment, Eleanor Voss was watching. She had lived on Maple Ridge for decades, and she knew every car that belonged on the block. She did not know the matte black Ford F-150 parked on the curb, and she certainly didn't know the broad-shouldered black man wearing a faded olive t-shirt and cargo pants who was currently leaning over the hood of the Charger. She squinted, adjusting her spectacles. To her, Des didn't look like a homeowner. He looked like trouble. She saw the tattoo on his forearm, a jagged spear, and assumed it was a gang sign. In reality, it was the insignia of the phantom unit he'd led through the Hindu Kush. Eleanor picked up her phone. She didn't dial the non-emergency line. She dialed 911. "There's a man," she whispered, her voice trembling with self-induced adrenaline. "He's stripping a car in the driveway of the old Henderson place. I think he's looting the property. He looks aggressive." Aggressive was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Des was currently humming an Otis Redding tune and tightening a spark plug. Miles away, Officer Vance Hargrove was sitting in his patrol cruiser, parked behind a billboard, scrolling through a dating app. Hargrove was young, with a buzz cut that was 2 weeks too long and a temperament that was a little too hot for police work. He was bored. Oak Haven was safe, which meant it was dull. When the dispatch call came through, "Suspicious individual, possible burglary in progress at 422 Maple Ridge," Hargrove sat up. "Show me en route," Hargrove said into the radio, flipping on his lights. He didn't use the siren. He liked the element of surprise. Back at the house, Des sensed the car before he heard it. It was a specific instinct, a tingling at the base of his neck that he had developed in environments where silence usually preceded an explosion. He didn't look up immediately. He kept turning the wrench, listening to the tires crunch over the gravel at the end of the driveway. He placed the wrench down on the felt cloth he'd laid out to protect the paint. He stood up, wiping his hands, and turned to face the street. Officer Hargrove stepped out of the cruiser. He didn't adjust his belt. He rested his hand immediately on the grip of his service weapon, not unholstered, but ready, a power stance. He left the cruiser door open. "Step away from the vehicle," Hargrove barked, his voice cracking slightly before finding its authoritarian base. Des stood still. He didn't raise his hands, but he kept them visible, away from his waist, palms open. It was the universal sign of, "I am not a threat, but I am not afraid." "Afternoon, officer," Des said, his voice gravel-deep, calm, and resonant. "Can I help you with something?" "I said step away from the vehicle." Hargrove advanced, walking up the driveway. "Put your hands where I can see them." "You can see them, officer," Des replied, not moving an inch. "I live here. This is my car. I'm doing a tune-up." Hargrove stopped 10 feet away. He looked at the house. Too big, too expensive. He looked at the car, classic, restored. Then he looked at Des, sweaty, dirty, wearing tactical boots. The math didn't add up in Hargrove's head. In Hargrove's world, guys like Des didn't buy houses on Maple Ridge. They broke into them. "You live here?" Hargrove scoffed, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Sure you do, buddy, and I'm the King of England. ID now." "It's inside on the kitchen counter," Des said calmly. "I can go get it, or—" "Don't you move." Hargrove's hand tightened on his holster. "You got proof of ownership for this vehicle?" Des sighed, a long, weary exhale through his nose. He had been back in the States for some time. He had hoped the badge-heavy attitude was just a story people told on the news. "Officer, my name is Desmond Kane. If you run the plates on the truck or this car, they'll come back to me. If you check the deed to this house, it'll come back to me. I'm not going to give you a hard time, but you need to lower your voice." "Don't tell me what to do," Hargrove snapped. He closed the distance, entering Des's personal space. This was a tactic. Hargrove loved the intimidation press. He wanted Des to flinch. He wanted Des to step back or shove him. He needed a reason. But Des didn't flinch. He stood like a statue cast in iron, his eyes dark and unblinking, locked onto Hargrove's. It wasn't a glare of anger. It was the look a lion gives a yapping chihuahua, a mix of pity and boredom. "Turn around," Hargrove ordered. "Hands behind your back. I'm detaining you for investigation of burglary and failure to comply." "Failure to comply?" Des raised an eyebrow. "I'm answering your questions." "You're resisting," Hargrove shouted, playing to the imaginary audience, or perhaps the neighbors he knew were watching. "Turn around now." Des weighed his options. He could disarm Hargrove in less than 2 seconds. He could break the officer's wrist, sweep his leg, and have him pinned before the spit from Hargrove's shout hit the pavement. But that would ruin his life. Des had spent decades fighting for a country that was currently trying to put him in handcuffs on his own driveway. He had to play the long game. "All right," Des said softly. "You're making a mistake, officer, a big one." "Shut up," Hargrove said, grabbing Des's wrist and spinning him around. He shoved Des against the pristine quarter panel of the Charger. That was the first mistake. You don't slam a man like Desmond Kane, and you certainly don't scratch his car. The sound of Des's chest hitting the metal was a dull thud, followed by the sharp clink of handcuffs being pulled from a belt. Across the street, Eleanor Voss was peering through her blinds, phone still in hand, whispering to the 911 operator. "He's caught him." The officer caught the burglar. Hargrove was rough. He wasn't just applying the cuffs. He was wrenching Des's arms upward, testing the limits of the shoulder joints. It was a move designed to inflict pain, to force submission. But Des's shoulders were thick with muscle and scar tissue. He barely registered the torque. He simply adjusted his stance, widening his feet slightly to maintain balance, absorbing Hargrove's erratic shoving. "You're tight on the left one," Des stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "Check the spacing." "I said, shut your mouth," Hargrove hissed into Des's ear. He clicked the cuffs shut, ratcheting them down until they bit into the skin. He patted Des down, his hand slapping aggressively against Des's cargo pockets. He pulled out a wallet, a heavy set of keys, and a folded piece of paper. Hargrove threw the items on the trunk of the Charger. He opened the wallet. He saw the driver's license, Desmond T. Kane, 422 Maple Ridge. Hargrove paused for a fraction of a second. The reality of the situation flickered in his mind. The ID matched the house. The suspect lived here. But Hargrove was too deep in the adrenaline now to back down. To admit he was wrong was to admit weakness, and in the toxic culture of the Oak Haven precinct, weakness was worse than incompetence. He had to find something else. He had to justify the stop. He looked at the folded paper. It was a receipt from a hardware store, but underneath it was a small black laminate card. Hargrove squinted at it. It didn't look like a normal ID. It had no state seal, just a series of clearance codes and a holographic chip. "What is this?" Hargrove asked, holding up the card. "Fake ID? You trying to impersonate a Fed?" "Look at the back," Des said calmly. "There's a number. Call it." I'm not calling your buddy to bail you out, Hargrove sneered. He shoved the wallet into his own pocket, a violation of protocol, but Hargrove didn't care. He grabbed Des by the arm and yanked him away from the car. You're coming in. We'll sort out your fake IDs at the station. Officer, Des said, planting his feet. He didn't move. Hargrove tugged, but it was like trying to pull a rooted oak tree. There's a camera on my porch. There's a camera on your dash. You are currently arresting a homeowner on his own property for no crime. If you put me in that car, you end your career. Hargrove's face turned crimson. He unholstered his taser. Get in the car, or I will light you up. You understand me? I will ride the lightning on you right here. Des looked at the taser. He calculated the distance, the spread of the prongs, the voltage. He knew he could take the hit. He'd been tased during SEER training. He'd been electrocuted by faulty wiring in a Baghdad bunker. This was nothing. Do what you have to do, Des said, but make sure your body camera is on. I want the judge to see exactly how you operate. Hargrove hesitated. He glanced down at his chest. The green light was blinking. He hated that light. Get in the car. Hargrove shoved Des toward the cruiser. This time, Des allowed himself to be moved. He had seen the neighbor across the street. He saw another neighbor, a teenager 2 houses down, holding up an iPhone. The audience was assembling. Des ducked his head, a reflex of habit, and slid into the cramped back seat of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat was uncomfortable, smelling of stale vomit and industrial cleaner. Hargrove slammed the door shut, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. As Hargrove stomped around to the driver's seat, Des shifted his weight. His hands were numb, but his mind was racing. He needed to make a call, but his phone was in his front pocket, currently inaccessible. Hargrove got in the front, breathing heavy. He keyed the radio. Dispatch, I have one in custody, uncooperative, transporting to station for processing. Possible forgery and possession of forged government documents. Des closed his eyes and shook his head slightly. Forged government documents. The kid had no idea. The cruiser pulled away, leaving the Charger abandoned in the driveway with the tools still laid out. As they drove, Hargrove kept glancing in the rearview mirror, trying to catch Des looking fearful. He wanted to see the panic setting in. You know, Hargrove said, his eyes meeting Des's in the mirror, we get guys like you all the time. Think you can move into a nice town, flash some cash, and do whatever you want. We check everyone here. Keeps the riffraff out. Is that what I am? Des asked. Riffraff? You don't belong here, Kane. I don't care what the deed says. I know a drug dealer's front when I see one. Des actually laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. Drug dealer? That's the box you put me in? Where else does a guy like you get the cash for a place like that? Rap music? Basketball? Hargrove smirked. I'm going to tear that truck of yours apart. I guarantee I find something, a roach, an unregistered piece, something. Officer Hargrove, Des said, reading the nameplate on the dashboard, I served decades in the United States military. I trained the men who killed terrorists you haven't even heard of. The money for that house came from a settlement after an IE. D took the hearing in my right ear and half the sensation in my left leg. If you tear my truck apart, the only thing you're going to find is a tire iron and a copy of the Constitution, which you clearly haven't read. Hargrove slammed on the brakes at a stop sign, the sudden jolt throwing Des forward against the cage. Shut up, Hargrove yelled. Not another word. Just remember, Des whispered, his voice dangerously low, you started this. They arrived at the precinct sometime later. It was a squat brick building that looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades. Hargrove dragged Des out of the car and marched him through the back entrance. The booking area was busy. A few other officers looked up. What you got, Vance? Asked the desk sergeant, a heavy-set man named Marcus Kowalski. Kowalski was eating a sandwich, crumbs dusting his uniform. Resisting, disorderly, Hargrove bragged. And this. Hargrove tossed the laminated card onto the high desk. Suspect was stripping a car on Maple Ridge, claims he lives there, had this fake Fed ID on him. Kowalski wiped his mouth and picked up the card. He squinted at it. He flipped it over. He looked at the holographic chip. He looked at the series of numbers. Kowalski's chewing slowed. He stopped chewing. He looked up at Des, who was standing calmly by the bench, flanked by Hargrove. Kowalski looked back at the card. He recognized the insignia. It wasn't standard military. It was JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, and the clearance code, Yankee White Level Access. "Vance," Kowalski said, his voice dropping an octave, "where did you get this?" "Out of his wallet. I'm telling you, it's a good fake. The guy's a pro." Kowalski stood up. He didn't look at Hargrove. He looked at Des. "Sir, could you tell me your full name and rank?" "Master Sergeant Desmond Kane, retired," Des replied, "and I'd like my handcuffs removed now." Hargrove rolled his eyes. "Sarge, don't listen to him. He's—" "Vance, shut the hell up," Kowalski snapped. The room went silent. Other officers stopped what they were doing. Kowalski walked around the desk. He wasn't reaching for his keys to book Des. He was reaching for his key to the handcuffs. "Sarge." Hargrove looked confused. "What are you doing? You didn't run this card, did you?" Kowalski asked, his face pale. "You didn't even look at the numbers. It's fake." "It's not fake, you idiot!" Kowalski yelled, unlocking the cuffs on Des's wrists. "This is a DoD contractor with top-level clearance. This man isn't a drug dealer, he's a federal asset." The cuffs clicked open. Des rubbed his wrists, looking at Hargrove with cold, dead eyes. "I tried to tell him," Des said to Kowalski. He preferred to talk about rap music and drug fronts. Kowalski closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. He knew what was coming. He looked at Hargrove. "Vance, turn off your body cam. Go to the captain's office now." But now, as Hargrove sulked away, confused and angry, Des leaned against the booking desk. "Don't bother turning off the camera, Sergeant. My lawyer is already pulling the cloud data from my home security system, and I'm pretty sure the ACLU is going to love the audio from his cruiser." Kowalski looked at Des. "Mr. Kane, I'm sure we can clear this up. Just a misunderstanding. New guy, you know how it is?" "I do know how it is," Des said, picking up his ID and sliding it into his pocket. "That's the problem. I fought for freedom overseas, Sergeant. I didn't think I'd have to fight for it in my own neighborhood." Des leaned in closer. "I'm not leaving until I file a formal complaint, and I want the badge number of the officer who arrested me and his supervisor's name and yours." The drama was just beginning. Hargrove had lit a match, but he didn't realize he was standing in a room full of gasoline. And Desmond Kane was about to bring the fire. Captain Elias Reed was a man who believed that any problem could be solved if you buried it under enough paperwork or shouted at it until it went away. He had been running the Oak Haven precinct for some time, and in that time he had swept more than a few indiscretions under the rug. But as he looked at Desmond Kane standing in his office, uncuffed, spine straight, radiating a silent, terrifying intensity, Reed had a sinking feeling that his rug wasn't big enough for this. Sergeant Kowalski had already briefed Reed. Top-level clearance, Yankee White, Special Operations. Reed rubbed his temples. "Mr. Kane," Reed began, leaning back in his creaking leather chair. He tried a conciliatory smile. It looked like a grimace. "Please, take a seat. I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot here. Officer Hargrove is exuberant. He's young. He sees a threat where there isn't one. We're willing to drop the disorderly conduct charge immediately." Des didn't sit. He stared at the framed photos on the wall behind Reed. Pictures of the captain shaking hands with the mayor, the governor, the local Rotary Club president. "You're willing to drop the charges?" Des repeated, his voice flat. "That's generous of you, Captain, considering there were no charges to begin with." "Well, technically," Reed hedged, picking up a pen and tapping it on his desk. "Hargrove filed a report stating you were combative and refused to identify yourself. But in the spirit of community relations, I'm willing to void the arrest. You walk out of here. Go back to your nice house, and we all pretend this afternoon didn't happen." "And what happens to Officer Hargrove?" Des asked. Reed sighed. "He'll get a reprimand, a note in his file, maybe a day of retraining on de-escalation." "A day of retraining?" Des said, finally stepping forward. He placed his hands on the back of the guest chair, gripping the wood until his knuckles turned white. "Captain, your officer pulled a weapon on a calm, unarmed man. He profiled me, trespassed on my property, assaulted me, and illegally seized federal identification. If I had flinched just once, he would have shot me. You know it. I know it." "Let's not deal in hypotheticals," Reed snapped, his patience fraying. "You're a military man, Kane. You know how it is in the field. Split-second decisions, fog of war. This wasn't Fallujah, Captain. This was a driveway in suburbia, and there was no fog until your boy brought it." Des reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I'm not accepting your deal. I'm making a phone call." Reed narrowed his eyes. "Who are you calling? A local ambulance chaser? I wouldn't advise that. This is a small town. Lawyers here have to work with us." Des didn't answer. He dialed a number from memory. It wasn't a local number. It was a direct line to the Pentagon's office of the Judge Advocate General, specifically a contact he had acquired during his time working with JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. Reed watched, unnerved, as Des waited for the connection. "Colonel Drake," Des said into the phone. The room went silent. Reed stiffened. "It's Master Sergeant Kane." "Yes, sir. I'm good. Listen, I have a situation. I've been detained by local law enforcement in Oak Haven. False arrest, assault, Fourth Amendment violations." "No, sir. They took the Canantra ID." "Yes, the Yankee white card." Des paused, listening. A faint smirk touched his lips. He thought it was fake. "Yes, sir. I'm currently in the captain's office. Captain Elias Reed." He held on. "Roger that, sir. I'll wait." Des took the phone off speaker. "Captain, Colonel Drake from the JAG Corps would like a word." Reed stared at the phone as if it were a live grenade. He cleared his throat. "Captain Reed speaking." "Captain!" The voice on the other end was like grinding steel. It wasn't shouting. It was the terrifying calm of a man who commanded battalions. "This is Colonel Drake. I am looking at Sergeant Kane's service record right now. Do you know what classified means, Captain?" Of course, Colonel." "Then you understand that when your officer seized a classified Department of Defense identifier and entered it into a non-secure local police database, he committed a federal offense. That card contains biometric data linked to national security assets. By taking it, you've technically compromised a federal operation." Reed's face went pale. We didn't scan it, we just looked at it. "I'm deploying a JAG liaison from the nearest base to your precinct. They will be there soon. Do not destroy any evidence. Do not wipe any body cams. Do not let that officer leave the building. If I find out a single frame of video is missing, I will bring the full weight of the United States military down on your pension. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Colonel," Reed squeaked. "Good. Put Kane back on." Des took the phone off speaker. "Roger that, sir. I'll wait." He hung up and looked at Reed. "He says to say hello." Reed slumped in his chair. He looked defeated, but then a flicker of self-preservation kicked in. He grabbed his radio. "Send Hargrove in here now." When Vance Hargrove walked in, he looked smug. He had spent the last while in the break room bragging to the other rookies about how he took down a massive suspect who was high on something. "You wanted to see me, Cap?" Hargrove asked, hitching up his belt. "Shut the door," Reed hissed. Hargrove closed the door and saw Des standing there. He frowned. Why is he still here? Did you book him?" "You idiot," Reed said, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I did my job," Hargrove defended himself, looking from Reed to Des. "He was non-compliant. I smelled marijuana in the car. I had probable cause." Des spoke up, his voice icy. "There is no marijuana in that car, and you never mentioned a smell until just now. I put it in the report." Hargrove lied, his face flushing red. "I wrote it down. Suspect appeared intoxicated. Smell of cannabis emitting from vehicle. That gives me the right to search. That validates the arrest." Reed looked at Hargrove. He knew Hargrove was lying. He knew Des was sober, but Reed was a survivor. If Hargrove could make the drug charge stick, maybe, just maybe, they could justify the stop. If they found anything in that car, it would muddy the waters enough to save the department. "You're sure, Vance?" Reed asked, his eyes boring into his officer. "You're sure you smelled it 100%? Hargrove said, sensing the lifeline. I guarantee if we toss that truck or that classic car, we find a roach, maybe a baggie. These guys always have something." Des shook his head slowly. "You're digging a hole, son. Stop digging." "I'm authorizing a search," Reed said, making a desperate calculation. "Hargrove, take a K9 unit back to the house. If you smell drugs, we need to verify it. If we find narcotics, the federal ID issue becomes secondary to a drug bust." "You're making a mistake," Des warned. "My lawyer is on his way. The JAG officer is on his way." "We'll be fast," Hargrove sneered. "I'll find what you're hiding." Hargrove turned and ran out of the office. Reed refused to look Des in the eye. "You better hope he finds something, Captain," Des said softly, "because if he plants something and my cameras catch it, you're all going to prison." While the political maneuvering was happening inside the captain's office, a digital hurricane was brewing outside. The teenager who lived 2 doors down from Des was named Tyler. Tyler was young, bored, and aspiring to be a social media influencer. He had filmed the entire arrest from his second-story window. The angle was perfect. It showed Des standing calmly with his hands open. It showed Hargrove screaming, escalating, and eventually slamming Des against the charger. Tyler had uploaded the video to social media with the caption, "Neighbor gets arrested for fixing his own car, cop goes crazy." Within minutes, the video had thousands of views. By the time Hargrove left the station with the K9 unit, it had crossed 1 million. The comments were a landslide of outrage. Veterans recognized the tattoos, mechanics recognized the car, locals recognized Officer Hargrove, who apparently had a reputation for harassing teenagers at the local skate park. One veteran commented, "That's a Ranger Regiment tat on his arm. This cop has no idea who he's messing with." A legal expert wrote, "Clear Fourth Amendment violation, no probable cause, lawsuit incoming." Inside the station, the phones began to ring. First, it was local concerned citizens. Then, it was local news stations. Then, national news producers were on the line asking for a statement regarding the Oak Haven incident. Des was still in Reed's office when the dispatcher knocked on the door, looking terrified. "Captain," she whispered, "there are news vans pulling up and the phone lines are jammed. The mayor is on line 1. Reed put his head in his hands. "Stall them." Meanwhile, back at 422 Maple Ridge, Hargrove pulled up in his cruiser. He had a German shepherd in the back named Buster. He also had a small plastic baggie in his pocket containing marijuana he'd taken off a high school kid some time ago and never logged into evidence. It was his insurance policy. Hargrove was sweating. He knew the captain was wavering. He needed a win. He needed to prove that Des was a criminal. He got out of the car. The neighborhood was quiet, but different. People were on their porches. They were watching. Eleanor Voss was still at her window, but now she looked confused. Why were there so many cars? Hargrove walked up to the charger. "All right, Buster. Seek," he muttered, pulling the dog toward the car. The dog sniffed around the tires. It wagged its tail. It didn't signal. There were no drugs. Hargrove gritted his teeth. He looked around. The coast seemed clear. He reached into his pocket, palming the baggie. He pretended to stumble near the open driver's side window of the charger. He was about to flick the baggie onto the floor mat. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice boomed from the sidewalk. Hargrove jumped, dropping the baggie on the gravel driveway instead of inside the car. He spun around. Standing there wasn't a neighbor. It was a man in an immaculately tailored navy blue suit holding a briefcase. Next to him was a camera crew from a major network. Their lens pointed directly at Hargrove's hand. "Officer," the man in the suit shouted, walking up the driveway with the confidence of a shark entering a school of tuna. "Step away from the vehicle immediately." "Who are you?" Hargrove stammered, trying to cover the baggie with his boot. "I am Bennett Lang," the man said. The name hit Hargrove like a physical blow. Bennett Lang was the most feared civil rights attorney in the state. He didn't just sue police departments, he dismantled them. He had bankrupted counties in the past. "I am representing Mr. Desmond Kane," Lang announced, playing to the news camera, "and we just caught you attempting to plant evidence on live television." Hargrove looked at the camera. The red light was on. He looked down at his boot. The corner of the baggie was sticking out. I found this," Hargrove lied, his voice cracking. "It fell out of the car. We have been filming for some time, officer," the reporter said, stepping forward. "We saw you pull it out of your pocket." Hargrove panicked. He backed up. "This is an active crime scene. Get back." "The only crime being committed here is by you," Lang said, his voice projecting so the neighbors could hear. "You are tampering with evidence. You are fabricating a crime to cover up an illegal arrest, and you are doing it to a decorated war hero." Lang held up his phone. "I just spoke with the district attorney. He has ordered a stand down. You are to return to the precinct immediately. Do not touch that car. Do not touch that evidence." Hargrove stood frozen. His world was collapsing. The narrative he had built, the drug dealer, the thug, was dissolving. Back at the precinct, the doors swung open. It wasn't the press. It was two men in dark suits and sunglasses, followed by a man in an Army service uniform with the rank of colonel. Colonel Drake had arrived, and he wasn't alone. The two men in suits flashed badges that said, "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Public Corruption Unit." They walked past the desk sergeant, past the dispatcher, and kicked open the door to Captain Reed's office. Reed jumped up. "Can I help you?" The FBI agent, a woman named Agent Sterling, didn't smile. "Captain Elias Reed, you are being placed under investigation for conspiracy to violate civil rights and falsification of police records. We are seizing your servers, we are seizing your bodycam docs, and we are taking custody of Mr. Kane." Des stood up from the wall where he had been leaning. He straightened his shirt. He looked at Agent Sterling. "Took you long enough." "Traffic was bad, Master Sergeant," Drake said, offering a hand to Des. "Good to see you, Des. You look like hell." "Rough day at the office, sir," Des replied, shaking the hand. Reed looked around, wide-eyed. This is a misunderstanding, Drake. It was Hargrove. He told me there were drugs." "We'll see what the logs say," Agent Sterling said. "We pulled the cloud data from Mr. Kane's home security system some time ago. We have high-definition video and audio of Officer Hargrove admitting he didn't like the way Mr. Kane looked. We also have footage of him planting the drugs just now." Reed slumped back into his chair. It was over. "Where is Hargrove?" Des asked. "He's on his way back." Lang's voice came over the speakerphone on Des's mobile, which he had left running. "And he's crying." The drama was peaking, but the hard karma was just getting warmed up. Hargrove thought he was going to lose his job. He didn't realize he was about to become the face of a national movement and the primary target of a federal indictment. Des walked out of the office, flanked by the colonel and the FBI agents. He walked through the booking room. The other officers, the ones who had laughed earlier, stared at the floor. They knew the storm had made landfall. As Des stepped out into the evening sun, the press cameras flashed like lightning. But Des wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the cruiser pulling into the lot. Hargrove was coming back, and Des was going to be waiting for him at the door, not as a suspect, but as the man who was about to end his life as a free man. The parking lot of the Oak Haven Police Department had transformed into a carnival of accountability. Satellite trucks were idling, their masts extended like robotic giraffes. Reporters jockeyed for position near the back entrance, the place where suspects were usually paraded for the cameras. Officer Vance Hargrove steered his cruiser into the lot, his stomach churning like a cement mixer. He saw the circus. He saw the black SUVs with government plates blocking the exit. He saw Bennett Lang giving a soundbite to a reporter. Hargrove gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles ached. He was still clinging to a shred of delusion. "I can fix this," he told himself. "I just need to explain." The baggie fell. It was a mistake. Reed will back me up. The union will back me up. He parked the car. He didn't see Sergeant Kowalski waiting by the back door. He didn't see the two FBI agents standing in the shadows of the awning. Hargrove stepped out. The flashbulbs erupted immediately, a stroboscopic assault that blinded him. "Officer Hargrove, did you plant evidence?" "Officer, are you aware the suspect is a decorated veteran? Why did you turn off your body camera audio?" Hargrove put his head down and pushed through the crowd, shoving a microphone away. "No comment. Back." He reached the heavy steel door, swiping his key card. The light blinked red. "Access denied." He swiped it again. "Access denied." Panic flared in his chest. He pounded on the door. "Open up, it's Hargrove." The door clicked and swung open, but it wasn't a friendly face welcoming him inside. It was Sergeant Kowalski, and Kowalski wasn't smiling. He wasn't eating a sandwich. He was standing with his arms crossed, blocking the threshold. "It's Sarge, let me in. The press is eating me alive out there," Hargrove pleaded, trying to squeeze past. Kowalski didn't move. He put a heavy hand on Hargrove's chest. "You're not coming into the squad room, Vance, not as an officer." "What?" Hargrove laughed nervously. "What is this, a joke?" "Gun," Kowalski said, holding out his hand. "Badge, keys, now." "You can't do this. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent." A female voice cut through the air. Agent Sterling stepped out from behind Kowalski. She held up a badge that gleamed under the harsh security lights. "Vance Hargrove, I am Special Agent Sterling with the FBI. You are under arrest for deprivation of rights under color of law, federal obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to manufacture evidence." Hargrove froze. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Federal? This is a local matter. You can't." "When you targeted a Yankee white clearance holder and tampered with a federal investigation, you made it our matter," Sterling said, snapping a pair of handcuffs off her belt. Hargrove looked at Kowalski, desperate for a lifeline. "Sarge, help me. I did this for the department, for the numbers." Kowalski looked at Hargrove with pure disgust. "You did this for yourself. Turn around." Hargrove turned slowly. The click of the handcuffs was louder this time. It sounded final. As Sterling tightened them, the back door fully opened. Desmond Kane stepped out. He had been processed and released, his record scrubbed clean before the ink had even dried. He was holding his personal effects bag in one hand. He looked fresh, unbowed, and utterly unbothered. Hargrove stared at him, the man he had called a thug, the man he had tried to ruin. Des stopped a few feet away. The cameras beyond the fence were going wild, zooming in on the confrontation. "I told you," Des said, his voice low and steady, audible only to the men in the circle. "I told you that you were making a mistake. I gave you every chance to walk away." "You set me up," Hargrove spat, tears of rage and fear welling in his eyes. "You knew who you were. You let me do it." "I didn't let you do anything," Des corrected him. "You saw a black man in his own driveway, and you decided he was a criminal. You didn't check my ID. You didn't listen to my answers. You wrote the script in your head before you even got out of your car. I just let you read it out loud to the world." Des leaned in, his eyes hard as flint. "Enjoy federal prison, Vance. I hear the food is terrible, and there's no union rep to save you in Leavenworth." Agent Sterling grabbed Hargrove's arm. "Let's go." As they marched Hargrove toward the waiting black SUVs, bypassing the local booking process entirely, the crowd of civilians outside the fence cheered. It wasn't just neighbors. It was people from the surrounding towns who had been harassed by Hargrove for some time. Des watched him go. He felt no joy, only a grim satisfaction. The threat was neutralized, but the war wasn't over. He turned to Colonel Drake, who was standing by the door lighting a cigar. "You think Reed is going to flip?" Des asked. Drake took a long drag. "Reed is a rat, Des. He'll sing like a canary to save his pension. But I have a feeling this goes deeper than just one bad captain." The interrogation room at the FBI field office was a stark contrast to the dingy Oak Haven precinct. It was soundproof, cold, and smelled of antiseptic. Hargrove sat handcuffed to the table. He had been crying for some time. Across from him sat Bennett Lang, Des's lawyer, present as a formality for the civil suit deposition, and Agent Sterling. They weren't yelling. They were laying out documents. "Vance," Agent Sterling said, her tone almost bored. "We have the video of you planting the drugs. We have the audio of you conspiring with Captain Reed. That's serious time right there. But here is the thing. We looked at your arrest record." Sterling slid a stack of papers across the table. "Over some time you have made numerous arrests for suspicious activity or resisting arrest in the Maple Ridge and Oak Haven Heights neighborhoods. In many of those cases, cash or high-value assets were seized: vehicles, jewelry, electronics. Hargrove stayed silent, staring at the table. "Here's where it gets interesting," Sterling continued. "In many of those cases, the assets were processed through civil asset forfeiture and auctioned off. But the auction records are messy. A Mercedes sold for little to a shell company that traces back to Captain Reed's brother-in-law. A seized Rolex missing from the evidence locker." Sterling leaned forward. "This wasn't just racism, Vance, though that was the fuel. This was a robbery ring. You and Reed were using the badge to shop for high-end goods. You saw Des Kane's Charger and you didn't just see a suspect. You saw a payday. You wanted the car." Hargrove looked up, his face pale. The twist had been revealed. It wasn't just about power, it was about greed. They had targeted Des not just because he didn't belong, but because they wanted what he had. I just did what Reed told me," Hargrove whispered. "He said if we found probable cause, we could seize the vehicle pending investigation. He said he had a buyer for the parts." "There it is," Bennett Lang said, scribbling on his notepad. "The admission?" Sterling nodded. "You are going to tell us everything, Vance. Every car, every watch, every person you framed. And if you leave one detail out, I will make sure you serve your time in the general population of a maximum security facility." Hargrove broke. He started talking. He named names. He implicated Reed, 2 other officers, and even the town's court clerk, who signed off on the expedited forfeiture orders. Meanwhile, back in Oak Haven, the fallout was nuclear. Eleanor Voss, the neighbor who had called 911, was sitting in her living room. The news was on. The headline read, "Oak Haven Police Ring Exposed, Veteran Framed in Asset Theft Scheme." Eleanor felt a cold knot in her stomach. She had thought she was protecting the neighborhood. She had thought she was doing her civic duty. But as she watched the footage of Des, calm, polite, compliant, contrasted with the footage of Hargrove trying to plant drugs, her worldview cracked. She realized she had been the weapon. The police knew she was a nosy neighbor. They relied on her calls to give them the pretext they needed to arrive and harass people. She wasn't a guardian. She was a pawn in a criminal enterprise. Her phone rang. It was her daughter calling from college. "Mom," the daughter's voice was shaky. Is that our street on the news? Did you call the cops on that guy? I thought he was stealing the car." Eleanor stammered. "Mom, he owns the house. Everyone online is talking about the lady in the window. They're calling you a monster. How could you?" Eleanor hung up. She looked out the window. Across the street, the lights were on in 422 Maple Ridge. Des was home. She saw him walking past the window. He stopped and looked directly at her house. He didn't wave. He didn't glare. He just looked. It was a look of absolute moral superiority. Eleanor closed the curtains, her hands shaking. She would eventually put her house on the market some time later, unable to bear the shame of living across from the man she tried to destroy. Back at the house, Des was sitting on his couch, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. The house was quiet again. The media had been dispersed by the arrival of the military police, who were now providing a courtesy watch over the property, a not-so-subtle warning to the local PD to stay away. The doorbell rang. Des checked the monitor. It was Captain Reed. He was alone. He wasn't in uniform. He looked like a ghost. Des walked to the door and opened it. He didn't invite Reed in. "Mr. Kane," Reed said, his voice raspy. I wanted to come personally before they arrest me." Des finished the sentence. Reed nodded. "The FBI is at my house. They gave me some time to say goodbye to my wife. I came here first." "Why?" Des asked. "To ask, why didn't you just show us the military ID immediately before Hargrove got out of the car?" Reed asked, a pathetic attempt to shift a fraction of the blame. Des laughed, a harsh sound. "I tried, Captain, but you know what? It shouldn't have mattered. I shouldn't need a top-secret clearance to be treated like a human being in my own driveway. I shouldn't need a colonel to save me from a patrolman. That's the point." I'm sorry," Reed said. "Save it for the judge," Des said. "You stole from this town. You stole from people who couldn't fight back. You just finally picked a fight with someone who could." Des started to close the door. "One more thing," Reed said, desperate. "Hargrove, he's young, he's stupid. Don't let them give him life. Hargrove is a grown man, Des said coldly. He made his choice when he tried to plant those drugs. That wasn't stupidity, Captain. That was malice. Karma is a mirror. It only reflects what you stand in front of it. Des slammed the door. He walked back to the living room. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Bennett Lang. Update. The governor just suspended the entire Oak Haven command staff. The Department of Justice is opening a pattern or practice investigation. Oh, and the city council wants to settle your civil suit before it goes to court. They're offering a substantial amount. Des typed back, not enough. I want the money to go to a legal defense fund for everyone else Hargrove arrested. Every single one. He put the phone down. He looked at the charger in the driveway. It was still unfinished. Tomorrow, Des said to the empty room. I'll finish the tune-up tomorrow. But the story wasn't quite done. There was one final loose end. The real twist was about to hit the news cycle, something that would turn Desmond Kane from a victim into a legend. The story of the Oak Haven incident had already dominated the news cycle for some time, but the final bombshell dropped on a morning. It didn't come from the FBI, and it didn't come from Des's lawyer. It came from the governor's mansion. Governor Catherine Holloway called an emergency press conference. She stood at the podium, flanked by the state police commander, her face grim, but her eyes wet with emotion. Yesterday, I was made aware of the identity of the veteran mistreated by the Oak Haven Police Department. Holloway began, her voice trembling slightly. The public knows him as Master Sergeant Desmond Kane, but to a select few he is known by a different name. She paused, taking a breath. Some time ago, my son, a freelance journalist, was taken hostage by insurgents in the Kunar province. The government said a rescue was impossible. The terrain was too hostile, the intel was too thin, but a JSOC team went in anyway. They hiked through hostile mountains. They engaged a force 3 times their size, and they brought my son home. The reporters began to murmur. Cameras zoomed in. The team leader carried my son the last miles on his back after taking shrapnel to his own leg. Holloway continued, wiping a tear. That team leader was Desmond Kane. He is the reason my son is alive today. He is a hero in the truest sense of the word, and to see him treated with such disrespect, such criminal malice by officers sworn to protect the peace, it is personal to me. The revelation set the internet on fire. Des wasn't just a victim of racial profiling. He was the ghost of Kandahar, a legendary operator whose service record was so redacted it looked like a black barcode. The GoFundMe that had been set up for Des's legal fees, which he had already pledged to the victims of the Oak Haven PD, skyrocketed. It hit a substantial amount in hours. In the county jail, Vance Hargrove watched the broadcast on a small TV in the common area. He sat alone at a metal table. The other inmates, some of whom Hargrove had arrested, were watching him. They knew who he was. They knew he was a dirty cop who had lost his badge. Hargrove put his head in his hands. He realized finally the scale of his arrogance. He hadn't just kicked a hornet's nest, he had kicked a mountain, and the mountain had fallen on him. Some time later, the sentencing hearing was held. Hargrove, Reed, and 2 other officers pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more corruption. The judge, an iron-faced woman who had no patience for betrayal of the public trust, did not go easy. Officer Hargrove, the judge said, you receive years in federal prison. You are not a police officer. You are a predator who hid behind a shield. Captain Reed got years. As the gavel banged, Des stood up in the back of the courtroom. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply buttoned his suit jacket, nodded to his lawyer, Bennett Lang, and walked out. He drove back to Maple Ridge. The neighborhood was different now. The for sale sign was up in Eleanor Voss's yard. She had moved out some time later, unable to handle the shame. The teenagers who used to be harassed by Hargrove were skating in the street, waving at Des as he passed. Des pulled into his driveway. The Charger was sitting there gleaming in the sun. He got out of his truck, walked over to the classic car, and popped the hood. He picked up the wrench he had been holding the day Hargrove arrived. He placed it on the spark plug. He turned it. Click. Finally, Des whispered. He closed the hood. He wiped his hands. He opened the door and slid into the leather driver's seat. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep, throaty growl that shook the pavement. It was the sound of freedom. It was the sound of a machine that had been broken, stripped down, and rebuilt stronger than before. Des put the car in gear and rolled down the driveway. He didn't look at the empty spot where the police cruiser used to sit. He looked forward down the open road, ready to enjoy the quiet life he had fought so hard to keep. The arrest of Desmond Kane wasn't just a mistake. It was a collision between arrogance and integrity. Officer Hargrove and Captain Reed believed that their badge gave them the right to define who belonged and who didn't. They thought power was about fear, but Des taught them in the world that true power is about control, discipline, and the quiet confidence of knowing exactly who you are. They tried to break a man, but they only succeeded in breaking their own corrupt system. The Oak Haven Department was dismantled. The victims were compensated, and a hero finally got the peace he deserved. Karma doesn't always come instantly, but when it hits hard. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story about the underdog fighting back. Share this video if you believe that no one is above the law. Thanks for watching.